Now, they're running out of face masks in Beijing after a week of thick smog has left residents fearing for their health. Air particle readings are more than 20 times the safety levels recommended by the World Health Organization, as our science editor Tom Clark now reports.
Chairman Mao peers out through the smog, his portrait one of the few faces in Beijing not wearing a mask. The pollution that's hung over the capital and other major cities for 7 days is the thickest it's ever been. The gloom has erased Beijing's high-rise skyline. Visitors are avoiding the Forbidden City. It's getting just a quarter of its usual daily footfall. Officials have tried to curb traffic and close industries in the city, but the smog won't shift and people have had enough.
What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of air pollution? Smog, power plants, traffic, those diesel trucks that think it's awesome to roll coal.
Honk for Bernie! Honk for Bernie! Woo! Tastes like America, right? Make America great again! Woo! Make America great, baby!
So many of our daily activities contribute to air pollution, it is almost impossible to avoid it entirely. It also affects everybody, not just your everyday citizen, but it affects governments struggling to regulate it. It affects gas and oil companies trying to adapt to a changing world. Environmentalists do everything they can to awaken the rest of the world to the ticking clock that is global warming. It can cause great disagreements and create some of the most unlikely alliances. With so many different stakeholders, of course there are going to be different approaches and solutions to a common problem, and that's what we're going to explore.
Air pollution problem terribly affects the citizens in health issues. According to Oilan's research, PM2.5 exposure can cause unfavorable effects such as cardiovascular disease, obesity, mortality, and respiratory disease. In addition, higher percentage of PM2.5 also cause high possibility for getting serious disease, especially cancer. These authors also state that regions with high cancer morbidity were seriously contaminated by PM2.5. This study provides further evidence for the spiritual correlation of PM2.5 pollution with cancer morbidity. This evidence strongly indicates that air pollution affects people into health problems by PM2.5.
I'm worried. I'm extremely worried about my health, especially after I saw postings online that talk about how bad the particles are for the lungs.
There's just a much higher chance of catching a cold, and it's much more serious for the children and the elderly.
Government officials have been fighting air pollution for decades now. Specifically, the U.S. has been attempting to make strides toward bettering the air. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency have been addressing several issues dealing with matters related to air pollution. They have made big strides like limiting certain air pollutants to enforce clean water and safe drinking laws. The EPA also enforces federal regulations to reduce the impact of businesses on the environment. The Clean Air Act, developed by the U.S., calls for state, local, federal, and tribal governments to implement the act in partnership to reduce pollution. Roles vary depending on the nature of the air pollution problem.
It is very easy to blame the bulk of our air pollution problems on large corporations. After all, 71% of our total emissions are traceable back to only 100 corporations, the number one being a natural gas company named Gazprom. With mounting pressure from the public and governments, these companies have no choice but to invest in clean energy. It is clear they have the resources to do so since they are the global leaders in energy. Shell, for example, is committed to doubling its annual investment in clean energy from $2 to $4 billion. But they have also just announced they'll invest $15 billion in oil exploration in Nigeria. In an effort to push laws that are favorable towards themselves, these companies have lobbyists in Washington that talk to lawmakers about what laws should and should not be passed. In exchange, these companies will endorse and donate to the campaigns of these lawmakers to push their agenda. This may sound somewhat illegal, but it is not. In fact, it is standard practice for pretty much any large corporation, and they factor this into their annual budget.
Environmentalists strongly believe in reform for clean transportation and trying to bring an end to companies and factories that primarily use coal. Statistically, coal produces less than half of our electricity, yet is responsible for nearly 80% of all power plant carbon emissions. The Union of Concerned Scientists says that there's a better and far more clean way for Americans to meet their energy needs. They state that renewable energy sources like wind and solar panels are able to generate electricity with little or no pollution and global warming emissions. As of now, cars, trucks, planes, and ships accounting for around 30% of the country's carbon emissions and more than 5% of the world's total global warming pollution. Air pollution problems affect various kinds of people such as citizens, government officials, environmentalists, and business people. Air pollution affects the citizens with health issues. The government officials have the responsibility to control the air pollution through regulations. The environmentalists should solve the problem in environmentally friendly ways. Business people should solve this problem by changing their investments in it and the environment. And by using the effective way to solve these problems, our world's future air quality can change in time. At this point, it is widely accepted that the best way to combat air pollution is to not only cut down on current emissions by implementing air scrubbers on factories, which filter out sulfur and dioxide and particulate matters, there also needs to be a strong push to move toward renewable energies. Some of these include solar power, wind power, hydropower, geothermal power, and even nuclear power. This is a video of how Iceland is capitalizing on its geothermal activity to make power.
In Iceland, the very ground itself is a vast and inexhaustible source of geothermal energy. So the question is, could we scale this up and use that motion to drive an electromagnetic generator and create electricity? Well, boom! That is exactly what Iceland have done. This is the Nevja geothermal power station, one of 7 major plants on this small island that are specifically designed to tap into that hotspot beneath the rocks. To get at the hottest rocks, what they've done is drilled a borehole up to 3 kilometers deep. Water is pumped down, it gets superheated, it expands into steam and it rushes back up to turn turbines and generate electricity on a national scale. Around 25% of all of Iceland's electricity comes from geothermal sources. The rest comes from hydropower, which means incredibly, all of Iceland's power comes from clean, renewable sources. And this cheap, clean energy has helped transform Iceland's economy from one of Europe's poorest countries to one of its richest. Electricity here is around 1/3 cheaper per kilowatt hour than in the UK. And that has fueled a highly profitable yet energy-thirsty aluminium industry that accounts for almost 40% of Iceland's total exports.
Obviously, not everywhere in the world has the kind of geothermal activity that Iceland has, along with their smaller population and their less demanding power needs. In the US, for example, we have areas with very high population densities and areas that are extremely rural. This is challenging because the high densities need quick and powerful ways to get energy such as coal, and rural areas need cheap ways to get energy, which is also coal or a comparable non-renewable resource. A solution to this would be for different regions of the United States to implement different renewable ways of receiving energy. Sunny places like the Southwest and Florida can get a large chunk of energy from solar arrays, and states with a lot of flowing water, such as Washington, can generate energy from hydropower. Of course, no one is expecting this to happen overnight, but if we give an effort to move towards renewable resources, we can gradually work our way towards minimal dependence on fossil fuels.
With many different stakeholders, of course, there is going to be conflict on just how much time, money, and effort we should put into our push for renewable resources. The sooner we do it, the better. The sooner we can introduce renewable energy as a common source of power, the quicker we will move into a new age of energy consumption.